This podcast includes explicit content. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to a new episode of the Daddies podcast. Television brought you the Great British Bake Off, and with the same loving commitment to deliciousness and mess, we bring you our latest episode on the great erotic novel. You see, we heard that millennials are losing interest in sex, and with the orgasm gap still at large, we thought perhaps some erotic literature to get you in the mood. Sliding into perverted prose, we catch up with the debut novelist Saskia Vogel to discuss her brand-spanking new BDSM novel, Permission.
The Daddies podcast.
My hair was dripping wet. She watched a droplet roll down my torso and then erased its path with her thumb. I sucked it. She held me close. I stiffened. She held me tighter and murmured, "Don't move a muscle."
Welcome, ladies.
Hello there.
It's actually International Women's Day very soon, so congratulations to everybody and celebrations.
Congratulations to everyone.
Congratulations on being a woman. Hashtag balance for better.
That's this year's theme?
Yes.
Is that like another yoga thing?
I think it's meant to be equality, but I was a little bit confused at first. But
Wait, who makes that hashtag?
International Women's Day Corporation.
So are there any particular women we'd like to celebrate today?
Since we're in Berlin, I guess that we get some like Berliner kind of vibes with like historic women, like Anita Berber. It's one of my favorite Berlin perverts.
Okay.
She was fun, wasn't she?
She was fascinating. She was an artist, an actress back in the 20s, when Berlin was like even more fun than these days. And I think she was like called the priestess of debauchery. She was a cabaret dancer, androgynous. She was nude, like on her shows. She would piss on her spectators, I think.
I heard about that. I think that actually only happened once because some gentleman wasn't paying proper attention to her performance. So she traipsed across the table and threw champagne in his face and then squatted over him and pissed on him.
And this is in the 20s as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
A legend nonetheless. Does anyone have any other women?
Well, I recently saw the documentary Oscar-nominated RBG, Notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. It was super inspiring. I mean, that woman is just so strong. Have you watched it?
I feel really naughty. I don't know who she is.
She's one of the Supreme Court judges. And right now, given the state of the Supreme Court in the United States, she's basically the last liberal judge left in the Supreme Court.
The last one.
Yeah, so she basically, every time they're taking a decision, she's like dissenting. And like, thanks to that, like maybe the future of law might be saved because of her vote. I read the other day on Twitter, I read this really funny thing. There was an article, from some like biology or whatever publication. And it said, the person on earth that is going to live 150 years has already been born. And someone retweeted it saying, well, I hope it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
We all hope that.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, because she's 80-something years old.
Oh, so she's got 70 years.
She keeps fit though, doesn't she?
Oh yeah, you in the documentary you see like her doing sports, and it's just so great.
That's where hashtag for balance for better is.
I see.
Also, did you hear? I just recently heard this year for the very first time in Germany, the 8th of March is going to be actually a holiday.
What do you mean? Like,
Really?
we have the day off?
Like we all have the day off. Like, yeah, isn't that crazy?
That's amazing. Very well deserved.
Yeah, that's really good.
Wow.
Which means though we're not going to be able to go shopping.
Because that's what all women
How are
want to
we
do.
supposed to be women if we can't go
shopping?
So, we finally have a sponsor. And this is none other than Daddies. That's right, the Daddies podcast sponsored by Daddies. Who would have thought it? This means if you want to see what our day job looks like, then head to daddies-podcast.com/Daddies. That's ERSTIES. Check out the video and follow the link and you'll receive 50% off your first month. Please note that the content is 18+.
Moving into the main course, today we're talking about erotic fiction, and we've all been enjoying a treat reading the love scenes in Saskia Vogel's novel. But actually, writing about sex is hard. It's rarely done well, and especially by a first-time writer. Do you guys remember the Literary Review's Bad Sex Award?
Yes.
Can't
wait.
particularly special winners from last year, didn't they?
Well, I think, wasn't it Haruki Murakami and James Frey who were leading this like all-male shortlist?
Coincidentally, all male.
What did they write?
Yeah, let's hear some examples of some of this stunning erotic literature that's out there at the moment. Let's start with James Frey.
I'm hard and deep inside her, fucking her on the bathroom sink, her tight little black dress still on, her thong on the floor, my pants at my knees, our eyes locked, our hearts and souls and bodies locked. Come inside me, come inside me, come inside me. Blinding, breathless, shaking, overwhelming, exploding white god, I come inside her, my cock throbbing, we're both moaning, eyes, hearts, souls, bodies, one, white god. Come, come, come. I close my eyes, let out my breath. Come. Oh.
Sure, that's
It sounds a little bit supremacy as well.
Okay. I'm not sure how much that added to that particular story, but we haven't read the rest of the book. So, surprisingly, it's also really well-known writers like Haruki Murakami that maybe go a little bit astray in their writing about sex.
My ejaculation was violent and repeated. Again and again. Semen poured from me, overflowing her vagina, turning the shit sticky. There was nothing I could do to make it stop. If it continued, I worried it would be completely emptied out.
Reading this is like meeting my heroes, and I wish I didn't meet them, you know? They're really good writers, and then I'm reading this and I'm like, oh my God.
So why are these writers, where are they going wrong?
I guess they just, when it comes to their own instincts, they lower the standards. And it just means that not everyone is capable of writing about sex. In the same way, for example, actors, like normal actors, are not capable of just like jumping into porn and doing the right job.
Yeah, they certainly seem to go into a distinctive instinctual mode when they write about these things in a way that isn't necessarily as disciplined as the other aspects of the work, where you really are having to kill your darlings and make sure it adds to the story or portrays the character more strongly. It seems that sort of decays a little bit when it goes into writing about sex. But is all hope lost for writing about sex? It's actually, some people are saying that millennials are getting less interested in sex. I actually read a headline that reads, "How do you sell erotica to millennial women? Make it more like podcasts." So I guess we're doing one thing right there. But that headline was advertising an app called Despair app, and it's short erotic fiction with different categories. So you can read it at different times, like I'm getting in the mood, or I'm just getting into bed, I want to relax, or with a partner.
That's interesting. Do you read it or do you hear it?
You hear it. It's kind of like, I listened to some clips online. I have to say I wasn't totally convinced, but I liked how it reframed it to be kind of like a Spotify or a podcast type thing, where you would listen, as it's an app, you maybe integrate it into your life a bit more and you think, okay. And it made me think of reading something aloud or listening to something with a partner. It's kind of like high caliber sexting.
Well, this is good. This is the start of something, you know? It's like...
Yeah, you see the market niche there. Yeah. Can we jump on it?
And theoretically, it could be really successful because the erotic genre brought in $1.5 billion in the US alone last year. That's even more than the crime and mystery sectors. I was really surprised by that.
I wonder if all these sales are more like in the shops or if like the fact that you can buy whatever is online has increased the sales. Do you reckon?
I reckon it has. I haven't got any proof about that, unfortunately,
like,
in my preparation.
I read a lot when I'm on the train, so if I'm going to read something, I want it to be a little bit like the ebooks, no?
I mean, yeah. And I'm guessing they're also counting that kind of like granny romantic fiction genre with the sort of painfully Gone with the Wind type covers, which they're saucy, but they're like, you know, they're romantic.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just that how often do you talk about erotic literature altogether? Right now, because of the internet, you have a little bit more access, at least to do it by yourself discreetly, because otherwise you just like wouldn't like discuss about it. I guess that even if you saw like some classics of erotic literature in someone's bookshelf, you will like, oh God, you're into the Marquis side, me too, blah, blah, blah. That didn't even happen, not even with the classics. I mean, everyone is hungry for some kind of like erotic products, whatever, whether porn or anything else. So it's just like, if you have a little more like, if you can do it like more anonymously, then of course you just like knock yourself out.
Yeah, I think it offers something slightly different to pornography.
Yes.
Reading it from a character's perspective, right?
Yes.
You're in their minds a lot more. And you are watching, but you're from inside someone else's mind instead of sat by yourself.
You tap into things that you cannot put in pornographic content. If it's like extreme fantasies.
Good point. The liberty.
Reminds me of that bit in Sex Education.
Sex Education, the series on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
One of the characters, her name is Lily, and she's very much like portrayed as like this sort of like geeky, pervy weirdo. She's portrayed there as like desperate to lose her quote unquote virginity. And it turns out that she also draws like these comics about extreme fantasies.
Celestial fantasies.
Yes, like aliens with massive cocks and like cocks from space here and cocks from space there. And like, they're all like gonna satisfy her and so on. And it's really cute. And the way also in which like character explores her own sexuality, it pretty much like draws a contrast between like her fantasies with these like very like otherworldly creatures and also like her real life in which she actually like discovers, even though that she's like very eager to have sex for the first time, penetrative sex for the first time, she ends up like discovering that she actually has vaginism. So she cannot even get penetrated without feeling pain.
I'm pretty amazed. I mean, this is a high school serious kind of story, right? Yeah. I'm pretty amazed that they're like having all of these topics in there. How did they manage? It's great because it is full in entertainment. And is it just me? Like we're there. I feel like.
Yes. I think it's great that they're covering this. It happened in Orange is the New Black, a similar concept.
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
true.
You know, and then she was writing like the fan fiction or something like that.
We're just getting, I don't know, was it a female writer or director? I think we're just getting more complex stories now because we're getting more women involved in directing and writing things.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Which is good for everyone.
Which is good for everyone.
Because we're finding
balance for better.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
not even Haruki Murakami gets it right.
Yeah, and I mean, Netflix is really popular, but we need complex and interesting characters to sustain that. And I think the next generation coming up maybe actually demands more.
Yeah, we do.
So ladies, what turned you on?
as in books.
Yeah.
I definitely covered erotic literature as a teenager, but at that point it was just categorized as teen literature. So there was a special section at the library and all of the books had this like ominous red dot on each of them. And my mum never let me borrow those books from the library, but I did obviously, but I had to hide them.
Wow, Olivia, you naughty library girl.
One of the key players in my bookshelf at that point was Judy Blume, of course. Have you heard of her?
No.
See, this is the problem with having such a multicultural group. Judy Blume wrote a lot of coming of age stories and a lot about sex. I remember a particular one called Forever that really got into it. Her messages, it was very much about anticipating having sex for the first time. And it was a little bit extreme. There would be bits like, think very carefully about having sex because, once you've done it, you can't just go back to holding hands. Oh my God. Yeah, it's quite extreme. All right. How about you lot? What have you been reading?
That's interesting. I think my first steps into more erotic literature was actually fan fiction. I remember it was early beginnings of the internet, and obviously Harry Potter was one of
a classic.
A classic. It's all classics. So I remember a friend of mine actually sending it to me, and he started writing it also, which was very exciting. And of course the main characters, Snape. Come on. Snape in all kinds of different combinations with everyone else in that school.
Sexy Snape, slithering in. But the 50 Shades of Grey started off from fan fiction.
Did it really?
Yes. Yeah, like Twilight. What's her name again?
E.L. James.
E.L. James, that she was writing fan fiction for Twilight. Christian Grey is based off Edward Cullen, and Anna, cute girl, nice homely girl, don't know her last name. She was based off Bella and that whole dynamic relationship. So
Gone wrong.
And what were you reading, Lena?
I think in terms of books, back in the early 2000s and so on, I used to follow blogs. And I followed a couple of blogs that were like specialized in erotic literature. So it was like really cool to see the reviews and so on and what they would recommend. And then I found out that this like Spanish publishing house called Tusquets has like this very special collection dedicated to erotic literature, which is called La Sonrisa Vertical, which in English means the vertical smile, which is already like very telling. And the editions are really cute because they have like, they're like all in pink and kind of like, they tell you like with a pink color that it's really naughty. And
Oh my God, you brought it. I want to see
yeah,
it.
that one, it's like a collection of short stories, really like tapping more into taboos and so. But like told in a very nice way. I mean, this is like a book from this Spanish poet called Ana Rossetti. And it's like, oh my God, this is something I have never seen in porn. And this is something that I'm not supposed to be liking, but this is somehow, I don't know, it just like tapped like another dimension of like whatever erotic
Naughtiness.
yeah, or erotic hunger you will have. And at the same time, because it's a book, it's such a safe space for like tapping into that without censoring yourself or without like hurting or inciting people into doing shit that they shouldn't do. Like early 2000s, like I went to a bookshop, brick and mortar bookshop, and I just asked for the collection about like, oh, do you have like any titles of the collection? Like very like timidly, like, you know? And then, yeah, they just like showed me, it was like, okay, just like browsing stuff and so on. I was like, okay, this looks good. Like someone who won a prize for telling short stories, because also short stories, I like the format of short stories more than a whole novel.
And yet I feel like, you know, throughout the whole novel, you have, of course, more space to like develop a character and really get in depth in like sexual exploration, if that is what you were set to do.
Yeah, I think especially as well, some of the emotional sides to it, like novels cover that really well. No, it doesn't necessarily have to, but that's definitely something that I found from erotic fiction that I haven't found elsewhere in my sex.
unless it's in real life to have an emotional connection with someone in real life.
You are in control of the relationship.
Exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said, especially women writers, like exploring fantasies and being, or just for anyone, being imaginative about sex and using some creativity around it. I think it's brilliant. I definitely thought that about Saskia Vogel's novel Permission, with the emotional exploration and that. You know, it isn't just like sex.
Yeah, I think it's better I like to invest more time in characters so that when they like do anything, I really feel it.
You understand their desires and where they're coming from. So yeah, without further ado, shall we invite in our unicorn, Saskia Vogel, for today?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
So excited. Saskia Vogel is from LA and lives in Berlin, where she works as a writer and Swedish to English literary translator. She has written on power and sexuality for various literary publications. Previously, she worked as Granta Magazine's global publicist and as an editor at the AVN Media Network, where she reported on pornography and adult pleasure products. Welcome, Saskia. We're delighted to have you here today.
Thanks, guys. I'm really happy to be here.
So we're talking to Saskia today about her debut novel, Permission. After the death of Echo's father, a fog of lust and sorrow pulls her towards affairs with mistaken daddies. Then she meets Orly, her dominatrix neighbor. But she isn't the only one drawn to Orly. Her houseboy Piggy isn't quite ready to lose his mistress. A heartfelt yet controlled coming-of-age story unfolds as Echo searches for her own love language and the permission to be. So what made you first decide to write the book?
I had been living in London and then moved home back to LA, because I think I'd thought like LA is probably the absolute best when you're early 20s. And I'd never been legal to drink in LA. And among other things, I was just like, LA is going to be really fun right now if I go back home now. And Also, I missed my family and blah, 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 like other stuff. But I went back, and one of my best friends at the time was living in this house that was kind of like a very like Friends, the sitcom situation. And everybody, there was like a master and a slave couple. And like one of the girls was like very involved in like involving events in the sort of S&M scene in LA, which was having like kind of a really big moment because of a promoter whose name I can't remember now, but he like made all these like iconic club nights. And so like the scene was really huge at the time. It had a lot of cohesion and it felt quite like a family. So I wanted to write something like 22-year-old me was just like, oh my God, this seems like such an amazing story. And then I couldn't figure out how to write it. I wrote it as memoir. I wrote it as like cheesy, like self-help book, not self-help, but like, I don't know, just like a wild times in like Los Angeles kink community. And all of it was so false. There was even an entire chapter I wrote that was in the vein of Raymond Chandler noir. And it just wasn't working. And so years and years and years, different bits of the story fell away. And then I wrote this essay in the White Review that for some reason, even though it's really different to the book, just made me go, oh, I want to write a story about a character that became Echo, and kind of it was small enough and it made sense to just dive in. I mean, also thinking back to working at AVN and misconceptions about things, writing a book that felt like true and like honored the people that helped kind of inform and inspire the story. I felt a lot of responsibility.
Actually, we were wondering if you had a specific audience in mind when writing it, or now.
Well, going back to being like 22 and this subject being like the first subject that I really threw myself into. I mean, imagine a world before like 50 Shades of Grey when everybody was like, please tell me what BDSM means. What do you mean? You can't just say BDSM. You have to like explain it every time you mention it in the text. So thank you, time that has passed, that has allowed like certain things to become much more like in the general understanding. But I think I wanted to write for an audience who maybe didn't have these particular questions about desire or these particular desires, but who just had questions about love and desire and would be able to connect to this book, because I think we're all wondering, how do I love? How do I want to be loved? How do I want to be made love to? What kind of person am I when I make love? And like, that was really important to me. Like, I wanted someone who doesn't care about BDSM to pick it up and go, this is a story with characters that seem real and that I can relate to because I have questions about life too.
Yeah, it definitely does that. So, you wrote in an essay that our relationship to pornographic material today speaks to how little we value lust as a force for creativity, knowledge, and insight. I know you've spoken elsewhere about sexuality being a force for creativity and overcoming certain taboos being something that frees you to know yourself better and maybe to write, for example.
My first boyfriend was such a lovely, pervy weirdo. And so I think between like having quite open and liberal parents and having such a wonderful and quite queer like entry into like exploring my sexuality, I feel like I've always just been sort of cool with it. I don't know if I felt a lot of shame.
So Eka loses her father in a tragic accident very early on in the novel. And when she meets Orly, she's at the point where she's somewhat, would you say, searching for her father in other men?
This is such an interesting question, and I love that you picked up on the kind of daddy element. Because I think in a sort of big and abstract way, I was thinking a lot about how the patriarchy fails us all. And so this notion of like killing the daddy is what happens when daddy goes away is kind of a question, like a central question in the book. I'm thinking of the particular section where she's kind of like, she's like rear windowing her neighbor. She's like really watching what happens across the street quite a lot, the cars that come in and out, and just kind of like paying attention to the house's rhythms. And I think it's part of her grief process, I think, as well, to just sort of, every man becomes her daddy because she wishes he would return. My shopping routine gave me something of my own in those weeks. And it was during these trips, when I pulled in and out of our driveway, that I began to notice the men. Initially, I thought the men were one man in particular, the old neighbor across the street, a retired longshoreman who split his time between Alaska and Hawaii. But I didn't recognize him. Maybe it was a brother or cousin. Workmen, I thought one day when there was a truck outside packed with lumber and shopping bags from the home improvement store. There was a man my father's age with a ponytail who carried the lumber in, and a petite man who walked with a self-conscious shuffle. The first time I saw the builder's car parked on the curb outside the neighbor's house, I parked on our driveway at an angle that allowed me to watch him in my rearview mirror. He did things that Dad used to do, home improvement projects that involved tarp, tools, plants, and wood. He left orange buckets filled with gloves and paint rollers on the driveway, which the smaller man would rearrange behind the pygmy palms flanking the entryway, so the mess was less visible from the street. Surely, I thought, there must have been more to my father than home improvement, but every attempt at memory felt contrived. My memories could have been the memory of many dads, I thought. Had I already forgotten what had made him mine? And one day, when she found me crying, Blanca held me and told me that Mr. Jack was a good man. He worked hard and loved his family very much. In that moment, her words were everything, but when I repeated them to myself, they were just other words. I watched the builder and the petite man install a trellis at the front of the house, and together they planted jasmine and honeysuckle. The next day, the builder and his truck were gone. The front door was open, and I heard hammering and drilling and the slow drone of a vacuum cleaner. One day as I was driving off, I thought I saw the petite man wave. I assumed the hybrid car in the driveway belonged to him, but I hadn't seen anyone driving it, though I did see other cars and other men. Their comings and going caused an uncommon amount of traffic for our street, but it was really only noticeable if you spent as much time staring at the street as I did. The more cars I saw, the more I kept watch. The men flowed into the house. I imagined them accumulating there like fish attracted by the algae and other life forms found on wharf pilings. A house crowded with men who built, carried file folders, made phone calls, fell asleep to the Weather Channel. What gravity had drawn these men here? What had tugged at their souls? I would catch myself thinking that my daddy would soon be drawn here too. I looked for him in every man who came to the neighbor's door and found him every time. The waves had turned him old, or young, or sometimes bald. The depths of the ocean had compacted him. The moon's pull had stretched him long, and there he was, transformed, knocking at my neighbor's door. Okay, so real life versus fiction. I don't know what is up with my brain, but when my mom would leave me in the, say, car when she'd go to the grocery store, I remember when I was really little, I'd have a lot of anxiety, and I would sit there and play this game of every woman who came out of the grocery store was my mother. And I'd be like, that's my new mom. That's my new mom. And I definitely put that into echo in this scene, this sort of panicked kind of anxiety fantasy of she'll come back. She just might not be in the same form that you know her. I don't know what that says about my childhood, but that was definitely kind of that space of wishful thinking that's also kind of uncanny and frightening. And, maybe she'll come back, but she'll come back a zombie, or she'll come back. Yeah, I don't know. But that's kind of the thought process I was having around dads and daddies. Because I think daddy, when I capitalize it, I think of it definitely in more of the Madison Young daddy.
It feels to me like there's a difference between sort of father, maybe in a kind of patriarchal sense of it, inheriting certain traditions and living your sexuality in a certain way, and then maybe daddy in a sense of looking for some kind of protection.
Exactly. I think that's exactly it. Yeah. There's a trickiness there as well. I'm not writing this book as the definitive book on this type of human or whatever, or these life experiences. But yeah, I just wanted to write kind of an honest book. And then I think especially with Orly's character, the dominatrix, I felt a lot of anxiety, I guess, because I was I want her to be really good at her job. She must come across as somebody who's good at what she does, but also it's not real if she doesn't also have bad days at work and things like that. And so I kept on wondering, am I undermining her by giving her challenges? But then I thought, no, it's not real to just give her that sort of facade of being just perfect at what she does and unbreakable.
Is it difficult for you to write about sex? You do it in a very delicate way, which I really enjoyed, and it was very sensitive.
I think many writers have the experience where they're writing and they're like, I am so turned on by my writing right now.
Sex writing. Yeah.
But I've noticed that every single time I was I deleted it because it just was me going on and on about just some sort of sexual fantasy that I'm really enjoying. But it has nothing to do actually with the book or whatever story I was writing. And so, yeah, that's what I tried to do. I guess Susan Minot wrote a book called Rapture. The framework is girl meets like woman meets ex-boyfriend on the street. She ends up back at his place giving him a blowjob. And so the book is like takes place during the blowjob, and it's all about her internal monologue. And I found that book really inspiring in terms of writing about sex, because I think what it did really well was like, it just went through all the emotions that you can have when you're like having, you know, sex, and how many feelings can come up. I mean, in any sexual encounter. And I think that's what I tried to do here. And also, I mean, with Piggy, I wanted the reader to be able to feel like the urgency of his desire, but maybe also the anxiety and the shame. So his sections, especially when he's aroused or thinking about sex or finally imagining that he might be able to have what he wants, the sections become kind of more fragmented. And the sentences are shorter, and I hope the effect is that the reader really gets to feel what it might be like to be a person or a character like Piggy who doesn't have a place where he can take his desires and is essentially on a lifelong search that ends with Orly. And all these years of not being able to have what you want because you don't know where to go or who to take it to, or you feel shame or you don't trust. You know?
I thought it was really touching when he was describing trying to hide things from his colleagues and being really meticulous about that. Since we're sort of talking about Piggy, shall we go into one of his scenes?
So the second part of the book is called Piggy, after the character, and I imagine it being Echo telling us the story that Piggy has told her. He's kind of running around Los Angeles, finally feeling like he can seek out what he wants. And he's been using the contact ads in the back of like a weekly newspaper, pocket full of change, seeking out phone booths where he can make these calls because he doesn't feel comfortable making these phone calls in his own home. So here is the second time he goes to visit a dominatrix. The second try, blonde, black roots and a scowl, cutoffs, old t-shirt, nothing like her ad. Hand on his arm, pulling him in. Take a good look outside. Before the door shuts, the lock turns. You can put those there. Living room. He puts the roses on the coffee table between a bowl of seashells and the foil from a yogurt cup. Yogurt side up. Not quite licked clean. No vase. No, thank you. This way. A regular bedroom. Something on the floor. Fast food wrapper. Don't ask if the sheets are clean. Undress and lie down. Losing his balance as he takes off his right shoe. Pathetic. Bed so soft he sinks in, smells clean enough, a little sandy, unsure of how to move. Watch her move, feel excited. This is it. Leather cuffs around his wrists. He wants to feel her skin. He wants her to speak to him, but instead she dives right in. Riding crop, riding crop, riding crop. Fuck. Riding crop, try to catch her eye. Riding crop. Closing the eyes, thinking star sapphire, but all there is riding crop, riding crop. Riding crop. Stop, riding crop. Stop, stop, stop. I'm serious. Stop. Silence. His skin in flames. You said you wanted me to hurt you.
Do you think that we need more empathetic stories to understand BDSM a little better? And is fiction better at doing that than, say, a film?
Yes, I think we need more stories because I read this book. But also, I mean, writing a book, it's hard. It's like it's like a marathon type activity, and the thing that really carried me through, I guess, was the sense of like, I haven't yet read a story about a man like Piggy. And I thought it was really interesting for me to explore and like exciting for me to like get into this headspace and get into this character who maybe is kind of, what is the reader maybe getting out of it? Like understanding why somebody might seek out a sex worker, why somebody might need to take their desire outside of a marriage. And like Piggy, we meet her really briefly, but he has this ex-wife where that relationship was not available to him to explore his desires. And I think, so he's been sitting with this and it's been sitting inside him and changing. And, I think that's where the anxieties and the shame and sort of the difficulty and like something that could have otherwise been like an open dialogue about, okay, so I need this in order to get off, or this is what sex means to me. It's not necessarily penetrative, all these things that not everybody feels comfortable talking about, or maybe even knows that they can talk about it.
I want to go back a little bit to when you were speaking, when you read the first extract of Echo looking out the window and sort of imagining things about these different men and if they could be her daddy. And at one point later on, she's speaking to Orly and she reveals that that was a kind of fantasy of hers. I wondered, Orly's response to Echo's fantasy of Orly's house being full of daddies was very assertive, and it was just like, we can make this happen. Felt like there was a lot of control within the fantasy and over the fantasy. Do you think there's anything women specifically should know about fantasizing?
I like Orly in that moment a lot because she's just kind of like open to it. Because I think Echo probably feels kind of creepy. She's been spying across the street at this house that she did not yet know was Orly's house. You know, she's making up stories about the people coming in and out. And yeah, and I think sort of to have someone just say to you, like, that's an option. Like, let's talk about it, I think is really powerful. But I mean, I think that's what's so powerful about pornography, actually, like, and especially sort of like queer pornography, is this, okay, so one of the things that I do sometimes is I volunteer some of my time for this sort of cinephile erotic film festival, porn film festival in Helsinki called Viva Erotica. And the first year I went there, I don't know, even though I've watched so much porn, so much porn, like during AVN and like in general, watching, you know, stuff from the 70s, from like the film festival that used to be around in Rotterdam, and these like archival things, and seeing all these like different representations of sex. I was just like, oh, I felt so much more in touch with like maybe my own desire, but also the idea, I felt like it expanded my vocabulary of desire. And I think like going back to the quote that you brought up earlier about like lust as a source of insight and knowledge, you know, pornography isn't really archived in the same way that non-pornographic cinema is. You watch these movies and you're just like, pornography can be art. There is good storytelling that could happen here. And what would these films be like if there was more of a golden age structure, like maybe more money flowing into them, sort of the economics were better? What would happen if we valued pornography as something that we could like watch and learn from? I think it would be really transformative.
I agree 100%. Like I feel watching pornography, and especially watching a diverse pornography, as you say, like diverse in sense of different bodies, different desires, sexualities, decades and approaches, like has made my reality so much richer and like allow me for exploring so many more things and also for understanding other people better, right? Like once you actually, as you're saying, like take a look at the variety of things, and it's so freeing, and it's just so much more, I think it helps you to be a better person and more tolerant, possibly.
But it also taps into like this very necessary source of validation that we cannot get elsewhere. And then we talk about, like having like means of like, as it's like lost as creativity and so on. Like it's also like lost for self-knowledge.
Looking is so important for people, like being able to like watch someone, to sit and admire somebody's beauty or sexiness, or just to like watch how somebody does something. Like, of course, we know babies, like they get to look and absorb, but I don't think that need becomes any less when we get older. And so there's a lot of like the idea of like who lets you look in the spaces in which we're like given permission to like really just like look.
Speaking of, would you please read us one of the sex scenes when Echo and Orly first get together?
This isn't going to work if you're afraid to look at me, Orly said. Her eyes were kind. I want you, she said. I'm on my period, I said. I don't mind. With one finger, she unfastened my towel and let it drop. My hair was dripping wet. She watched a droplet roll down my torso and then erased its path with her thumb. I sucked it. She held me close. I stiffened. She held me tighter and murmured, "Don't move a muscle." She let me go. I breathed in sips until I seemed not to be breathing at all. I stood still. She dragged her thumbnail down my chest where the drops were falling, leaving marks, white from the pressure, then red, lines that faded slowly. She commented on how they shifted and changed, paying close attention. She studied the effect of her actions, refining them until I was no longer cold. From jaw to shoulder, from collarbone to hip, dip of the neck to navel, hip to thigh. She noted every shift in my breath, every hair raised, how and when the goosebumps spread. She dragged her nail across my breasts and my body rolled towards her. There was nothing I could do to stop it. I tried not to blink. Pain glowing, the heat rising, trying to keep still. The awareness again of blood rushing, breath quickening, pulsing, expanding, contracting, wet. Everything she conjured in me, rushing to appear. There was nothing else I could do. I surrendered myself to her.
I love how sensitive Ollie is to everything. That tenderness just makes me want to cry. She's such a dream. Isn't she? I'd still like to ask the Britney Spears question.
I think we all want to.
Yeah, we all want about that.
In your novel, you reference the great Britney Spears song "I'm Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman." To explain that for Ollie, as long as songs like this were hits, she would never go out of business. Can you speak a little bit more about this? And do you think the business or the desire will be different for future generations?
Sometimes I just think it's so incredible how many stories we tell about ourselves and how the stories like can shape an entire perception, how it can shape an entire like medical practice. And the Britney Spears song was kind of the perfect pop representation of exactly this idea of like the stages of womanhood according to ancient Greek medicine. You know, that a girl was never herself. She was always in the care of a father. And this in-between stage, where we get a lot of the, you know, stories about maybe like sacred prostitutes or Aphrodite and things. It's all about like managing this like extremely dangerous time when a girl is moving outside the care of a home because she's in that transition period of like, I'm going to move out of my childhood home under the care of my father into a marriage where I can like fulfill my womanhood, my role as a woman by giving birth to a child. And I really like that kind of dangerous space, the in-between of the Britney Spears song. That's what she says, right? When she's like, I need some time just for me. And so I think the entire book is kind of about being in that in-between space and kind of claiming it, refusing to just passively participate in a narrative where you're just going to go find yourself another daddy to take care of you, trying to figure out what it means when there maybe is no daddy with a capital D.
Before you go, what's next for you? This is your debut novel. What's coming next?
Short-term vision, or like short/medium term is super exciting. I'm going on book tour. So I'll be launching this at Le Traitage in Berlin on the 1st of March. And then I'm doing an event on a different theme at Other Nature on the 26th of March. And then I'm going to the States for a while, which is going to be really fun.
This has been Saskia Vogel talking about her debut novel, Permission, published by Dialogue Books. It's going to be released March the 7th in Europe. Yeah. And then in America.
In April in America, where it's published by Coach House Books.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
It was a lovely time. So for today's aftercare, we actually got a question in from one of our listeners. Question is, how do I last longer? I'd like to delay my orgasm during sex as it is sometimes too short for me. If it takes longer, it is more intense. Do you have any tips or exercises to follow? Many greetings.
What a lovely question.
I would say masturbate yourself more. Like, get to learn your body.
Oh, right. You mean I was...
Oh, you meant like to like masturbate before the date and then go?
Yeah, so that you're not just like too ready to go.
That also helps, I think.
Yours is more conscientious. I like get to know your body.
Yeah. But for getting to know your body, I feel like then you have to do, exactly, a conscious masturbation, right? It's not just about like quickly getting off.
No,
that's counterproductive.
That will fuck you up.
What would be the right way of consciously masturbating in order to improve like your knowledge of your body and controlling more your orgasms?
Mm-hmm. I think, obviously enjoying it. And then when you feel the impulse coming up, try and redirect it. Maybe try some different kinds of touch that stimulate you in another way.
I'd also suggest like choosing the porn that if you're gonna use porn for masturbating, maybe choosing films that are not just like very short clips that are meant to, deliver very quickly, but maybe like indulge or take the time to actually enjoy a longer clip where there's a build up, where there's maybe a different rhythm or something more slow, or maybe something where you can integrate more and like follow the journey instead of just, quickly getting to the point and just looping that specific moment.
Because also breathing exercises are able to center yourself, to kind of, how to say it, to kind of like balance the energy that you're putting in the moment. Because in the same way, like, for example, like bad breathing, it can also like lead the other way into coming too fast, or into also like having a little bit more of like consciousness about your body and where it is, and take control.
Maybe last thing, if you're with a partner, just try to please them first instead of focusing on your, needs and place. And also possibly like, choose positions or actions that are more focused on giving them pleasure. And they're maybe not, doing the trick for you in the moment, but just like focus on that before you go to you.
Also in the overall choreography of your sexual encounter, I think maybe it's easier to do this when you have a more sort of long-term partner and you've established certain things, but consider the order of your positions. If there's a position where you know that's going to make you come, put it a bit later on. Do some other things first.
It's about the journey, not the destination.
Great. I think that's great advice from everybody, and we hope that our listener lasts longer. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Ersties podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you like to listen. New episodes come out on the first Friday of every month. Follow us on Twitter at Ersties Podcast, and you won't miss a thing. Ciao. Okay, thank you. Ciao.
The Ersties podcast.